April in Florida is a turning point for gardeners. Some crops are reaching their peak while others are just getting started. But what vegetables should you plant this month to keep your garden thriving? Stick around because I'm going to share the best vegetables to plant in the month of April so you can make the most of April's warm weather. Hey there, Florida gardeners. If you're wondering what to plant in the month of April, you've come to the right place. April is a great time to transition your garden towards the heat-loving crops that are going to survive our warmer temperatures. Whether you're in North Florida, Central Florida, or South Florida, this guide is going to walk you through exactly what's right for you, and I'm going to share some tips about whether you should be direct sowing or using transplants for all of these crops. Let's get into it. Let's start by talking about bush beans. Bush beans are those that will grow in a short, compact plant. This plant really doesn't even need any support at all, so it's great for a beginner gardener who maybe doesn't have all of the supplies or all of the trellises set up. The thing about bush beans that I've noticed is that you really do need a lot of plants to get a good harvest. The first time I planted some Kentucky Wonder bush beans, which is more like a traditional green bean, I ended up having to harvest and then freeze them and then add to them over the course of the season because I just didn't have enough plants out. Right here I've got several lima bean plants and it seems like it's going to be the same thing. It'll produce quite a bit, but not enough to have like a family meal. I have 3 kids in my family, so I need quite a bit of lima beans. I may have to harvest them and then add to them as the season goes on. But in April, all of Florida can plant lima beans, so I can still add more plants right now, which is what I'm going to do. I would highly recommend direct sowing beans because they do not like their roots disturbed. Pole beans are another type of bean that you can grow, although pole beans, I must warn you, will grow to be about 8 feet tall, maybe even 10 feet tall, so you're going to need some sort of trellis to support those plants. On the plus side, a pole bean will give you a lot more beans for one plant in comparison to a bush bean. Similar to a bush bean, you're going to want to direct sow these, and all of Florida can plant them in the month of April. Southern peas are another type of pea that all of Florida can plant in the month of April, and these ones are going to be really heat tolerant. These are going to be your Crowder peas, your black-eyed peas, and let me just tell you, we had our homegrown black-eyed peas for New Year's Day this year. And I gotta say, they are so much better than the canned black-eyed peas that you can buy at the store. Similar to the other beans, you should be direct sowing your southern peas. Now when it comes to direct sowing your beans and peas in the garden, you're gonna need to make sure your soil does not dry out. In April, that can be a little bit tough because April is one of the driest months of the year. So what I recommend is picking up something like this. It's a moisture meter. I'll drop a link in the comments below. This is one that I picked up on Amazon for like 15 bucks, maybe less. But it shows you if the soil is dry, moist, or wet. And this is something that I use all the time to make sure that my soil is the right moisture level. Before we go any further, I want to take a minute to introduce myself for anyone who might be new here. My name is Jen and I'm here in Melbourne, Florida, Zone 10A for gardening. On this channel, I'm sharing my journey with learning how to garden in my suburban backyard in hopes that I can inspire others to start a garden too. If this type of content is something that you're interested in, go ahead and hit that subscribe button and check out the other videos on my channel. Now let's talk about what types of leafy greens we can be planting in the month of April. Unfortunately, something like this mezclin lettuce or this endive over here is not going to tolerate the heat too well, so it's not a good idea to plant these in the month of April. What you can go for is a Swiss chard. Swiss chard can be started by direct sowing or by seed starting, whichever one you prefer. But it's one of the most heat tolerant leafy greens that you can find. In the past, I've done a celebration variety, which is more colorful, but if you want one that does well in a salad, I would try perpetual Swiss chard, which you can buy from the Urban Harvest website, and I'll drop a link to those seeds below. Another type of leafy green you can plant in the month of April is a tropical spinach like Malabar spinach. This is my first year growing Malabar spinach, and I direct sowed the seeds, and I got about 50% germination rate, so you may want to seed start those to increase your odds of actually getting a start. Since it's still okay for me to plant a tropical spinach, I'm going to go ahead and just sow some more seeds wherever I can find the space in the garden. Now let's talk about some fun cucurbits. Unfortunately for South Florida, it's too late to plant any of these cucurbits. And for Central Florida, you can still do squash, but I would advise against doing cantaloupe, cucumber, and watermelon. Right here, I've got some Boston pickling cucumbers. They seem to be doing pretty well. They're growing, and I don't see any signs of powdery mildew yet. They're flowering, and I direct sow these cucumber seeds. So North Florida, if you haven't gotten your cucumber seeds in the ground, I highly recommend getting them in the ground this month. This will be your last month where it's a good idea to plant cucumbers. Back here, I've got a cantaloupe growing that I sowed just a few weeks ago here in Central Florida. Unfortunately, now that we're in April, I feel like it's a little bit too late for Central Florida to plant cantaloupes. Anybody watching who's in North Florida, it's fair game to still plant your cantaloupes this month. Similar to the cucumbers, they're not going to transplant well, so I would highly recommend direct sowing your cantaloupes. Just make sure that soil doesn't dry out so much that you don't get any germination. Central and North Florida can still be sowing seeds for our summer squashes. Right here I have a gray zucchini plant, and right next to it is another one. Zucchini is interesting because it grows kind of like in a bush-like habit. It's not a vining. So you can get away with no support at all, or you can try to grow it vertically and keep it off of the soil just by adding a bamboo stake right here and trying to tie that plant to the bamboo stake. This will be our last month to direct sow any summer squash, so make sure you give it a shot. Next, we've got our winter squash. Now, even though it's called winter squash, yes, you can still plant it in the spring and the warmer season. The reason it's called winter squash is actually because the skin is much thicker and it stores for long terms, so it's intended to feed a family in the middle of winter when they may not be able to grow much. Back here I've got a spaghetti squash growing that I direct sowed, and then I have a butternut squash right next to it. But I have all of this cattle panel trellis space to wrap the vines wherever I need to. Again, if you're in Central and North Florida and you want a summer or winter squash, make sure to direct sow the seeds this month. Watermelon is the last cucurbit I want to talk about, and it's really only good timing in April for North Florida to plant watermelon. I would direct sow the seeds, and I would recommend planting a sugar baby watermelon, which is what I've got going right here. These are going to be smaller watermelons, so they reach harvest much faster than a large one. Lucky for North Florida, in April you guys can still plant tomatoes. Right here I've got an Italian Roma tomato that's been going actually since October. Now here in Florida, we can plant tomatoes in the spring and we can plant tomatoes in the fall. What happens if you plant them in the spring is you're probably going to be trying to get that harvest before you get so much pest and disease pressure that it's unenjoyable to grow the crop. Now in the fall, what you're trying to do is plant it early enough so that you can get a harvest before the daylight duration decreases so much that your tomatoes are barely even ripening. So when planting tomatoes in the fall, we have far less pest and disease pressure, but the downside is you may not get ripe tomatoes before the cold temperatures kick in. In the spring, it's kind of the opposite. You'll have no problem getting your tomatoes ripe, but at some point you're going to be overwhelmed with pests and diseases. So as we move towards our summer, we're going to be looking for heat-tolerant crops, right? Sweet potatoes are another great example of a heat-tolerant crop. These will grow all summer long. In April, I recommend that you try to find your slips. You can go ahead and plant them if you've got your slips already, or you can start working on your slips, which will take like 6 to 8 weeks. As for me, I was waiting to start them until after some spring break travels, so I'm going to start my slips this week. And what I'm going to do is take a grocery store sweet potato and put it in a tub with some soil on my back lanai, cover it about halfway, and then in about 6 weeks I should see some sprouts. And sometimes, depending on the location of that sprout on the potato, you can cover it up and it'll grow roots right on the potato. Or you can separate that slip off, put it in a jar of water, and it'll grow some roots. And at that point, once your sprout has roots, you can put it in the ground and start growing sweet potatoes. Sweet potatoes are going to take months to reach harvest. Last year I planted my slips out in May and I harvested them in September. The next crop to plant is corn. Now it's a little bit too warm now in South Florida for corn, but Central and North it's fair game. If you've ever heard of the Three Sisters companion planting technique, it consists of planting corn together with squash and beans. And what's supposed to happen when you do Three Sisters planting is the corn stalk grows very fast and grows upright, and then the beans will use that as a trellis support, and the plant will grow and be supported by the corn stalk. And the squash is meant to vine on the ground and act as a mulch to protect the moisture in the soil beneath. Now I haven't tried the Three Sisters planting myself because I just haven't really grown corn here. I'm a little worried about putting it in a raised bed and how much space it would take up, but it's certainly a great option if you have an in-ground garden. Now I've heard, although this is a great companion planting concept, sometimes the timing makes it a little bit more challenging than might have been anticipated. So let me know in the comments below if you've done the Three Sisters companion planting technique and how you stagger the planting to make sure you're not accidentally shading out some starts. Now, corn needs to be pollinated by the wind, so for proper pollination, you're gonna want them pretty close together. The next crop we can all be growing in the month of April is okra. Okra is a heat-tolerant crop that we can be growing all throughout the entire summer. Last year, I grew it in my raised bed and couldn't believe how big they actually got. It was almost like I had a tree in my raised bed. So keep that in mind when you're figuring out where to plant them. Also, be aware that okra, once it starts flowering, it grows so fast. You're gonna be harvesting okra every day to make sure that you don't let it get too big and too woody. I typically go with a Clemson spineless okra, and I'll just direct sow the seeds since it's so fast growing. Now I want to talk about herbs. April is a perfect time to plant almost any herb in Florida. Now what I love to do with herbs is fill in all the empty space in the garden. You can see behind me there's a little bit of space that's just covered by mulch in the garden, and it doesn't have any of the big producing crops. Right here you can see I've just put cilantro all around my pepper plants. Like, this is a bell pepper plant behind it, and I'm gonna harvest like all of this cilantro and make some tacos this weekend. It's a great way to use that empty space in your garden without having to worry about spacing too much. Now, an herb like basil you can use on a caprese salad, or you can season your chicken with it. Cilantro goes so great with so many Mexican foods. Chives are another versatile herb that you can put on top of eggs or mixed into your dough for bread. And then we've got dill. Dill is a great companion plant for our cucumbers that are growing. And personally, I love to use dill in a chicken salad. I recently planted a lot of sage. I'm trying to see if I can keep it growing all throughout the summer. So I put it in a partial shade area on the side of my house. We always use a lot of sage when cooking some comfort foods in the fall. Rosemary is another one I want to talk about. Rosemary is one that you're going to need to buy a start for. But once you buy that start, you can propagate rosemary really easily by just putting a cutting in some soil. And I've been working on this hedge on my front yard, and it's going really well. It just seems to grow so easily in Florida without much effort. Now we've gone over all the crops we should be planting in the month of April. I hope this video was helpful for you. Go ahead and hit that subscribe button if you enjoyed this video, and I'll see you guys next time.